Hey guys, what's up? Today we're gonna talk about something pretty cool that I just recently added to my collection. Yesterday I found a really good price on it. As you've seen on the title, Meet the Beatles. We're gonna talk a little bit about the album. My version is a 1976 reprint. It's in pretty good shape. The cover is not in the best shape ever. I'd say it's good. It's got this thingy here, but it looks beautiful. I just gotta say that this cover looks awesome, even if it's a little bit degraded. And it's gonna be the same thing I always do on my videos here. I'm gonna sit down for a bit with you guys and ramble about something I like about the Beatles, right? And we're gonna talk about Meet the Beatles because this was an extremely important album for the band. It was the first Capitol Records album released in the U.S. So, of course, as the photo itself shows, this was released right after with the Beatles. My pressing here has this a bit of a weird cover because the photo is different here. It's a Brazilian pressing, so you can see their clothes and stuff, and I guess it's different in the UK pressing. It's the photo is a bit more like this one, although on this picture here on Meet the Beatles we have a bluish color filter added to it, which to me looks awesome. It looks great. This one's in black and white, and of course it's got more exposition or something. I'm not really sure, but I wanted a mono version, a mono British version of this, although it's really hard to find here in Brazil. But anyway, this was released in, if I'm not mistaken, the 10th of January 1964, or it was in January 1964. I could be wrong on the 10th. I should have written it down. But anyway, it's the first album released by Capitol, as I said before, and that shouldn't be mistaken as the first Beatles album released on the US, because some people don't know that Capitol was a subsidiary of EMI, right? But they had a weird relationship in which Capitol lawyers was always trying to assure that Capitol wouldn't be bossed around by EMI. So what they did, and I just recently, yesterday, before I bought this, I read this in the Beatles Tune In. This is the Brazilian version of the book. This is volume 1. And it was, and what they did, the lawyers, was that they told, the Capitol lawyers told EMI lawyers that they couldn't simply boss around Capitol because of antitrust laws and monopoly stuff. I'm not sure exactly why, in terms of the law, but that wasn't true. Mark Lewison actually researched it, and he found that this was just a load of bullshit, so that Capitol held some independency after they were bought by Capitol in the late 50s. What I mean by that, what that led to, was that Capitol had the possibility of rejecting artists, rejecting EMI artists that had their albums released on the UK, which meant that EMI thought that buying Capitol meant that a lot of their artists and a lot of their records would come to the US, but in reality, the top guy at Capitol just didn't care about the British artists. So what they did really was that they rejected most of the artists, and by most I mean almost all of them. And a fun fact is that George Martin wasn't exactly the best. He was the producer at Capitol. He was the leader of Capitol, of Parlophone. I'm sorry. Um, it was a label from EMI, and he wasn't very successful. Parlophone was always considered the third label between three of the EMI labels, so it was the least important one in terms of sales. But George Martin actually had a bit of a better history with Capitol. Capitol, of the small chance that they'd pick an English act up, it was probably a George Martin one. But anyway, I digress. So what I mean, giving all this huge historical background, is that Capitol really had the first ability to say no to British artists, right? And they did do that a lot, as I mentioned before. So in the first time they were introduced to the Beatles, they rejected them. And so the first album released in the US was Introducing dot 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 the Beatles by VJ Records. It was released a couple weeks before this, and there was an album released in Canada called Beatlemania with the Beatles, which was exactly the same album as this one regarding track listing. And I've read that the Beatlemania with Beatles has the best stereo sound out of all of the With the Beatles pressings. Anyway, so Capitol, all of a sudden, I Want to Hold Your Hand got a number one in the US, and the Beatles just blew up, and they were already so famous on England. So they thought, bit the bullet finally, and we gotta release those boys over here. So that's Meet the Beatles for you. This is a huge history of Meet the Beatles, and let's talk about the cover here for a while. Of course, we have this header here, which I think it looks great. I think looking like this, man, this album cover is just so good. I don't know if I'm just used to With the Beatles, but I feel like this blue filter over here works really well with this picture. And this header looks awesome. It feels vintage but not old, right? And back here we have a very run-of-the-mill back for album covers at the time. So we have a text, which I'm not sure who wrote that, and we have the song list here, and we have a little bit of detail about the Beatles themselves. And this photo here, which I think it's a funny photo to include. But let's talk about the track list now, shall we? We've talked about the history, we've talked about the cover. What about the track listing? Well, we're gonna compare it to With the Beatles, okay? So side one to me is awesome. Of course, we have the point that, yeah, Capitol did this extremely shitty thing that was including singles on albums. The Beatles were totally against that. I don't know if you guys know that, but they did include the singles here. The Beatles didn't want their customers to feel like they've been fucked with, basically, because they hated when they bought a brand new album and when they realized they had most of the songs on the album on the singles. That's their experience on buying records when they were young. So they didn't want their fans to feel cheaped out, right? So that being said, the Capitol didn't care about that at all. They included the singles. So side one starts off with "I Wanna Hold Your Hand, I Saw Her Standing There." This is a great, great album opener. Although I feel like maybe they should have switched them off, because I just see "I Saw Her Standing There" as an album opener. 1, 2, 3, 4 starts. It's just perfect. But "I Want to Hold Your Hand," it's also a really strong opening, and I feel like some people, especially non-Beatles fans, they think less of "I Want to Hold Your Hand" just because it's called "I Want to Hold Your Hand." It's kind of sappy in that way, but it was an extremely important song. Maybe the most important Beatles song of 1963 for sure, but even the early Beatles, we could say probably before "Help," this was maybe their most important song because it was their big break on the US, right? Just hold on a second, please. No cuts here. So "I Want to Hold Your Hand, I Saw Her Standing There." This boy, I love this boy. I think it's so underrated, and it sounds so good on this stereo mix. It's a stereo album, by the way. I didn't mention that. It's the stereo version. It sounds so good, so good. "It Won't Be Long," I think it's a much, I don't know why, but I always feel like "It Won't Be Long" and "Hold Me Tight" kind of go together as Paul and John rockers on the same album. I don't know if there's a bigger reason for that, but I've always preferred "It Won't Be Long." "All I've Got to Do," I think this song is extremely, extremely underrated. Extremely underrated. And it's fun that they've kind of stuck with the order here. So the first three songs, "I Want to Hold Your Hand," "I Saw Her Standing There," and "This Boy," weren't with the Beatles, but it starts out with "It Won't Be Long," then "All I Gotta Do," then "All My Loving," which is the last song on side 8 of this album. So they kind of follow the track listing here, which is cool, right? Although they cut them right at the middle, right? "Don't Bother Me" is next. It's the 4th song here, and it's the first song on side 2 on Meet the Beatles. Okay? But let's read again side 1. "I Want to Hold Your Hand, I Saw Her Standing There," "This Boy," "It Won't Be Long," "All I Gotta Do," and "All My Loving." Oh my god, this is such a good side 1 or side 8. It's banger, straight after banger. You could argue that "It Won't Be Long" is a little bit weaker than the other ones. You may argue that "All I've Got to Do" is weaker. I don't think so. I disagree. I think it's probably one of the best songs on With the Beatles. But yeah, it's really strong considering what we've got ahead, because side 2 is not one of my favorites, not really. We have "Don't Bother Me," "Little Child," and it's again continues on the same order of the track listing of With the Beatles. So "Don't Bother Me," "Little Child," "Till There Was You," and side A of With the Beatles ends with "Please Mr. Postman." So they cut that out. And then we have "Hold Me Tight," "I Wanna Be Your Man," and "Not a Second Time" on Meet the Beatles, which is just a mix of the B-sides of With the Beatles. Okay, so again, "Don't Bother Me," "Little Child," "Till There Was You," "Hold Me Tight," "I Wanna Be Your Man," and "Not a Second Time." To be honest, not that great, not that strong, except for "Till There Was You." I think "Till There Was You" is great. I think everybody loves that song. It's a classic, a Beatles classic. George's solo is so incredible on that one. But the other songs, I feel like if I if I had to rank the With the Beatles songs, they would probably all be on the bottom half, right? Or at the bottom with Little Child, for example. Don't Bother Me, I think it's fun. Although, looking back, when I read that it was George's first song, it's kind of noticeable, and it's a great song, and the instrumentals are amazing. This is something that I feel like should be maybe even more talked about. The Beatles were so tight, especially considering it's their second album, and they were already so tight on Please Please Me, right? So the instrumentals are great on all of those songs, but the lyrics on Don't Bother Me are kind of, I don't know, kind of mid. Sorry about that, but it's kind of mid. And Little Child, it's probably one of my least favorite Beatles songs, although I did listen to Meet the Beatles today before I recorded this, and it doesn't sound that bad. It doesn't. I liked it, but it's not one of my favorites. On the contrary, it's one of my least favorites. But the instrumentals are fun. The lyrics are bad, and I feel like the stereo mix is really prejudicial to Little Child. I think I want to give it a listen on mono. I have all the mono mixes on my computer. I'm gonna do that right after. I'm sorry, I finish this, but I feel like the mono mix may do it a lot more justice than the stereo mix. Hold Me Tight is fun. I've already talked about Till There Was You. Hold Me Tight is fun, although it's not better than It Won't Be Long. But it's fun. The instrumentals are cool. I Want to Be Your Man, it's okay. I think it's a little bit annoying, to be honest, and I don't like when Paul sings it live. I think it's an easier song to sing. That's why Paul puts it in. And of course, he liked to tell that story about the first Rolling Stones #1, and not a second time. It's okay, but it's the second to last Beatles with the Beatles track, and the last one is Money. Money is just awesome. It's a great version by the Beatles. They fucking rock on this. Pardon my French, but it just doesn't make a lot of sense. So I'm gonna close all of this rambling with this thought here. Of course, side A is extremely strong. Side B, not so much, in my opinion. Side B could have been a little bit better. For example, we don't have Please Mr. Postman. I love that song. I think it's great. We don't have Roll Over Beethoven. Great song also. We don't have You Really Got a Hold on Me. We don't have Devil in Her Heart. And all of the songs I said here are covers, and they picked Till There Was You as a cover, and that's it, really? I think so. All of them are Lennon McCartney except for Till There Was You, I think. Trying to find here another cover, but I think that's it. So yeah, they clearly chose Lennon McCartney tracks, although I'm sorry, Lennon McCartney, but especially side B of With the Beatles, I'm a huge fan of the covers. And it's something I don't say. I usually don't say I love Lennon McCartney songs, of course, and I usually pick those over covers, especially on Please Please Me, right? Please Please Me has the strongest songs are Lennon McCartney, right? But on With the Beatles, I love the cover. They were so tight. Roll Over Beethoven is great. You Really Got a Hold on Me is beautiful. Devil in Her Heart is awesome. I love that one. It's a favorite of my dad's too, so that helps. And Money is a banger closer that they certainly try to recreate that twist and shout feel, and I think they did it. I think they did recreate it, although Money is not even as close, as well known as Twist and Shout. Anyway, Meet the Beatles. It's fun looking at Capitol releases, seeing what they came up with. They try to divide and make more Beatles records. Extremely American, right? An American way of dealing with the discography of the greatest band of all time. What do you guys think? Please leave me here in the comments. Thank you for watching. If you've watched so far, please comment banana down here. I don't think anybody will watch this through, but if you do, thank you very much. Leave a like, comment banana, okay? Meet the Beatles, a good record, yeah. Thank you.